Welcome to GBIRL, the podcast looking at the real business world of esports, gaming, and streaming with the people and personalities behind it all. Here is your host, BillTheConquerer.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. And as a lot of you know, January 16th, the New York Times put out this tone-deaf, scolding article that somehow gaming is a bad thing. And you know, I started to turn into the old man yelling at clouds concept, but I'm like, wait a minute. There's got to be somebody out there who's smarter than me, who sees things from a different angle and can help me understand what I'm trying to articulate. And I have with me today a person. She has like all the credentials. We'll make sure to put her LinkedIn profile in the description below. You can see all the smartness that she has. I have Dr. Stephanie Orme from all the way from the East Coast. We had to work through some technical difficulties, but here we are on the podcast. So thank you very much for making time for me today. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me on.
All right. So just a little background into you so people kind of know who you are. You're a visiting assistant professor at visiting assistant professor at Emmanuel University in Boston, right?
Emmanuel College, yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry, Emmanuel College. Okay, and that's an important distinction that a lot of people don't know. Okay, so give us a little background on yourself and talk about what you do, because you do like media studies and lectures on gaming, and you're trying to convince a bunch of old money people on the East Coast that gaming's actually a thing, right?
Yeah, more or less. So as Bill mentioned, I'm a professor at Emmanuel College in Boston. I'm an East Coast girl at heart, so we'll talk about it. I did my PhD at Penn State. I graduated in 2018. And my primary research and teaching interest is in the digital games industry and gaming culture. So I'm really interested in how gaming production happens and how it's experienced by people differently based on their identity, whether that's gender, race, sexuality,
right?
Disability, so on and so forth. And also how players experience gaming culture based on those things, right, in different ways. So yeah, I'm in a very lucky position to be able to research that subject that I'm passionate about, and also occasionally teach courses specifically on that. And then I also teach about media studies kind of more broadly as well.
Very nice. And I was going to say, and this is one of the quotes I try to live by is, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And I'm glad to be in your room today, Dr. Steph. So just to kind of start at a higher level and break this down. When I read this article, my first thought is, okay. So gaming is bad, but we can't go outside because we're going to get the virus, but we can't play games because screen time is bad, but we can't be around each other because the virus is bad too. I'm like, what are we supposed to do for entertainment? This isn't like 1860 where at the end of the day you're sitting in your rocking chair with one candle reading a book, and that's your source of education, entertainment, and social interaction for the week. I was like, okay, is the New York Times just tone deaf? Are they trying to get clicks? I mean, help me out here, Dr. Steph, please.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, I will say, so first of all, this New York Times article that came out is nothing new, right?
Right.
Anyone with an eye on mainstream media, this exact freak out, right, that we have about screen time in general, but even specifically about video games,
right,
happens like at least once every 6 months, right? It has since the 1990s, right? Since like Mortal Kombat for this whole thing. So, to me, I don't think that article is like groundbreaking anyway, right? But you're right in that we have this additional layer of we're stuck inside our homes, right? What else are we supposed to do kind of conundrum, right? And what I think is really interesting and what's sort of lacking from the perspective of the Times and other people who levy these kind of criticisms is, it's not just that people are playing games, but they're also like binging Netflix for 6 or 8 hours a day, right?
Right.
And yet we never see think pieces that are telling us about how we're watching too much Netflix. Ever. I don't think I've ever seen one, right? And so I think a lot of what, it's coming from a lack of understanding about games and their positive benefits. Now, I'll be one of the first people to tell you that I think anything done in excess can be bad for you, right?
Yes,
Netflix
yes.
included.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
Yeah, but I think that's what's often missing from these discussions, right? Like, how much are these kids actually playing a day, right? Myself, I shoot for 2 to 3 hours of playing a game every day. In the evening, that's how I unwind, right? I may not get to do that every day. Some days on weekends, it might be 6 or 7 hours.
Right.
And I think I'm mostly a pretty adjusted, well-rounded person.
Right.
In general, right? And so I think a lot of it comes from, again, a place of concern that's well-meaning, but also from a place of misunderstanding about games, right?
So, okay, so why is it, I mean, maybe it just goes back to the fact that humans are generally lazy creatures. And once you get a narrative in your head, it's sort of hard to counter that, because then people have confirmation bias. Like you said right as I introduced you, you talked about a Mortal Kombat. And when that arcade game came out, it was for its time, it was huge. It was revolutionary. There was blood. There was fighting and blood and fatalities, and people like, oh my gosh! And even people complained so much that when it was ported to consoles, they had to take out the blood and redo the finishing moves. And then there's this tired narrative that video games cause violence. And I'm like, it's like, why does this? It's these easy narratives that feed into the general fearful nature of human beings that just drive me bananas. And I mean, I get that humans are generally fearful creatures. I get it. People don't like new things. Change is difficult. That's why old people yell at young people and young people hate old people. And I get it. I do. I get it. I try really hard not to be the guy, get off my lawn, you darn kids. Still, what needs to happen here? Because this narrative has got to shift. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, as someone who's looked a lot at the research on violence in games,
right?
To date, that research is extremely muddy and mixed, right?
Okay.
It's about a 50-50 split between studies that purport to find some kind of link between playing violent video games and engaging in aggressive or violent behavior, and about 50% of them say there's really nothing to suggest a relationship there, right? The research itself, right, also tends to run into a lot of sort of methodological issues.
Thank you. Thank you.
Even how we define violence or aggression, right? It's
right.
defined very loosely. It's defined differently from study to study. There's the question of how do you actually measure something like that, right? And I don't say this, just to be like critical of these people. I think they're working sometimes with the best tools we have, but I think, at least for the general public too, or reporters who might look at these studies and then they report it as fact,
right?
Not really understanding the limitations of experimental social scientific research, right?
And what we defined as violent aggressive behavior in 2005 has shifted dramatically 15, even 5 years later. What we considered aggressive behavior in 2015 has completely shifted. And it also depends a great deal upon context. Somebody who's a boxer will define aggression and violence differently than somebody who's a writer, just because that's your world. That's how you do it. So I think I think what you said is really good there. It comes down to, what is your methodology? What are your parameters that you're setting first off? And this is something else that people need to realize. For as objective as scientists want to be, there is always bias, and that's why. And I hope that people younger than me will understand this. One study saying one thing does not change the entire narrative of everything. You have to, it's called the scientific method. You have to get the same result using the same methods and procedures over and over again to get more towards, okay, this is like more than likely. And anyway. Okay. Yeah. So I don't want to get off on a huge tangent about scientific methodologies here and just have the whole audience go, Bill, you're once again screaming at clouds. I'm like, okay, I don't want to scream at clouds. I don't want to scream at clouds. But I think that what the New York Times article misses, just completely misses the mark, is that in the last 5 years, the rise of Twitch, the rise of Mixer, Facebook gaming, streaming in general, that there is a fantastic opportunity to create for yourself a viable career with a very minimal investment. I know streamers who have started with consoles. There's features built into the Xbox and PS4 and PS5 where you can stream directly from the console. And if you have a camera, even if it's a crappy camera, you can still stream it. And so that has made generational wealth for a lot of people. And I saw this article yesterday online in the Esports Observer. Let me make sure I get the author correct before I rant on about this person's great work. I believe, yes. So this article in the Esports Observer by Clinton Sparks, how gaming is the new hip hop, and for people about my age who saw the birth of MTV. I actually watched MTV's first broadcast in 1978. I just want to throw that out there to everybody. And how the hip hop scene created opportunities for people to dig themselves out of poverty. I think gaming is that next step. This person, Clinton Sparks, feels the same way. Dr. Steph, what do you think?
It's funny. I didn't even realize when you sent me that article yesterday that Clinton Sparks had written that. Okay. He's a huge influencer in esports culture. He's like I think he's a really great example of one of those success stories, actually. So now knowing that adds like this whole other layer to that really great piece. But yeah, I agree. And I have a lot of thoughts on this as someone who is an educator in gaming, who often is approached by school administrators and parents more often than not of students who want to study video games or get involved in esports. And they say like, so is my kid just going to go to school and like play video games? Like, what's the deal? Is it right? They're like, I don't know, they want to be a YouTuber. Like, tell them that's not a real career. And I'm like, well, hold up, right? Like, by your definition, right, in a different era, it maybe wasn't. But as you've mentioned, right, times have changed substantially in the last 5, 6, 7 years.
Right.
To where streaming and esports have now become these legitimate career prospects. And I really think, again, to the article's point, to what Clinton was talking about, is especially for some of these, lower income and marginalized individuals, gaming can become that entryway. Pew Research study, put out a report a few years ago showing that mobile gaming is biggest among non-white groups. So they're far more likely, to play games on smartphone devices, right? Yep. And so I think that question of like access to games is kind of shrinking in a lot of ways. And so you're giving groups that traditionally wouldn't have had avenues to go into production type of careers are now finding themselves having a passage into that arena. And I think it's awesome. I think it's kids are really, really passionate about it. They get excited about it. And I think, as you mentioned, like, it's so easy, relatively easy to stream, even on just a basic setup and kind of get your feet wet.
Right.
And a lot of people are experimenting with that. And then, it grows into a legitimate career for them, which I think is really exciting.
So, okay. So when we're having this discussion and there are two sides, people are like, how is being a YouTuber a career? And you're like, then you have to go into explaining how the YouTube ad revenue system works and how Twitch works and things like that. So, I guess I have the perspective of being able to, say, okay, I was around before the internet. I get that old people are sometimes afraid of change, and that's fair. I get it. Old people don't like change. You're like, wait, this wasn't this way when I was a kid. I didn't own my phone. I rented my phone when I was a kid. It's like, now you can hold your phone in your hand, and I'm like, okay, just relax. It's okay. So when these educators and when these administrators and parents come to you, they're like, my kid is like on this and I can't get them off of it. What are some things that you say to them?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things I say, is I usually go over, well, okay, so if your kid wants to do this for a living, right, here are the different pathways to doing that, right? And we talk about examples and case studies of successful individuals who've done exactly that, right? So I'll say, like, there is professional esports, right? And kind of explain that process to them a little bit. People do become professional streamers, right? Here's kind of the general gist of it.
Right.
At the same time, I always have an obligation as an educator, who cares about my students, to also be realistic, though, about those odds of success, right? I always laugh in my gaming classes. I usually have 1 or 2 students who want to be indie developers, and there's always like the week where I joke that I'm like gonna come in and crush their hopes and dreams.
Yep.
But it's kind of the same idea. Like, we have a week where we talk about what is indie game development and how does it work, but also the very real barriers to entry and success, and the fact that less than 1% of indie games developed will even turn a profit. Right. And, I think it's important to have those conversations, right? Like, your kid isn't necessarily going to become the next ninja, right? And major YouTube star. Right. But to me, what's really important is to talk about how so much of what comes from video gaming and esports education is transferable skills.
Thank you so much for saying that. Thank you. I'm glad I didn't say that first. Thank you. Go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
No, I mean, that's like my whole platform, right? So I taught a class on Twitch streaming at a school recently. And so in there, the students learned how to set up a Twitch broadcast, and that's what they did all semester. And I think only one of them kind of wanted to do it as a career. Most of them had never streamed in their life. Some of them weren't even gamers, right? And, it wasn't the kind of thing where I was like, this class is going to make you a successful Twitch streamer, right? And that wasn't even really what I was training them for, but more about understanding the industry, and then also giving them just some general production skills. Because a lot of them were interested in film production and podcasting and things like that. Right. But for me, it's important to emphasize okay, let's take what we learn in this context and see how it applies to so many other industries, right? I've had students in these classes go on and do production work for, esports events, right? Or, say they want to go into broadcasting more broadly, right? Or even just the social media managing components that every organization has, right? They're all looking for these people with these skills, and so much of those skills are the lifeblood of streaming and esports and gaming. So that's how I always sell it, and I firmly believe in that.
See, and that whole bit right there, that kind of circles back to the point that I made about gaming. Gaming is the new hip hop. When the hip hop culture rose to prominence, late 70s, early 80s, MTV, it coincided with the rise of MTV, Yo MTV Raps, things like that. That was when people started to realize, I don't have to be on camera to have a job. I can be behind. There's tons of stuff to do off camera. And this is something that I'm sure 85 to 90% of the jobs in gaming don't have anything to do with being on screen or even playing. It's being an admin, support work, event staff, event organization, production, journalism, things. There's so much more that the growth of gaming creates, that there are transferable skills. And this is I try really hard to impress this upon parents myself. This is your opportunity to connect with your child and teach them how to run a business, because when you're a streamer, you're a business. You have costs. You have costs. You have revenue streams. You have you have the structure of your daily business. Whether what are your revenue generating activities? What are your cost generating activities? And I've seen teachers who do this well. They get in with the kids and they show them, okay, so you need this technical understanding because it creates an efficient process. And there's so much in the way of business acumen, business understanding that you can teach people with gaming and math. And I've honestly seen a lot of introverted kids, and you put a pen in their hand or teach them how to use Adobe, and they just make graphic art that just blows your mind. But they don't say a word to anybody. They just are insanely good artists, and there's so much involved.
Absolutely.
So I mean, so from the other side of this, what needs to happen from the gamer end? Because gamers are kind of, not all gamers are outgoing. No one's going to be the next Ninja, the next Dr. Disrespect, the next Dr. Lupo. No one's going to be that. That's not going to happen anymore. It's going to be something different, something else. What do gamers need to do here? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's funny. I almost feel like this is gonna sound kind of strange, but I feel like gamers are like part of the problem in some ways. When it comes to people sort of misunderstanding, what gaming culture is and the merits of it. And again, I don't mean like all gamers, right?
Right.
However you want to define that. But certainly the vocal contingent of gaming culture that a lot of people think of when they hear gaming, right? They think of, again, like, these toxic individuals, right? Things like that.
Right.
Who make gaming a really unwelcoming space for a lot of people.
Right.
And one of the things where I feel like a lot of, again, the misunderstanding around games comes because it's still, while it's increasingly mainstream, and I think esports has been a huge part of that, it still remains something of a subcultural kind of activity, right? It's still something that, like, a lot of people wouldn't call themselves a gamer, right? Even if kind of ironically they play mobile phone games all the time, right?
Right.
And I think, again, I find that a lot of the people who misunderstand games, it's because they had no exposure to it, right? They have no direct experience with it themselves. And, I think we as players kind of holistically can do a lot more to encourage more people to play games and work at making gaming as a whole like a more inclusive, welcoming kind of space so that people from all walks of life who would normally be really critical and skeptical of games and their benefits are more comfortable coming in and trying it, right? And seeing for themselves, like, okay, this is actually pretty rad, right? And not a bad thing at all. Right. I don't think that's like the whole solution, but that's just like something that I've kind of been sitting with is, again, gamers always complain about like being misunderstood and ostracized, but, many of them kind of do it to ourselves.
Well, yeah. I mean, when your entire world is Overwatch and all you talk about is, or I guess I should say, all the lingo that you use is from the game, and your parents look like you and go, well, what's a diva? I don't wait. So wait. You played the game and you're a tank. 3 tanks. Why do you want 3 tanks? And so it's. I mean, it works both ways because each generation kind of evolves their own lexicon, right there. And so what was cool, rad, and funky fresh back in 83, it's still cool, rad, and funky fresh in 2019, but they just don't call it that, right?
I don't even know what they call it now. I'm getting old.
Right. And so I just totally dated myself there. But I mean, so the fact that you have a PhD means that you spend a lot of time in academia. You dealt with a lot of what people would consider kind of uptight, stodgy, very rigid, here's your box, fit in your box concept. But I mean, what is it that some of these people who sit in their offices and write blogs all day, I mean, I'm obviously generalizing here, but there's just a perception that people in academia, people that are older than me, I'm 48, that's okay, but people that are older than me are just like, they don't get it. But I guess the question is, from your experience, because you've spent time with them, what do they get and what do they not get?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have to say, where at Penn State, where I was studying my PhD, I was really fortunate to have faculty who, like, across the board were completely on board with my gaming research. And
Good.
I think it helps too. There have been students before me who had done gaming research. So where I was, it was seen as like really legitimate, even by the older faculty members, right? And I actually had there's an older faculty member in the department who's a media historian and like really interested in like old school technology, like telephones and cable. Well, yeah, I mean, like old stuff, typewriters, like the whole 9 yards. And I ended up putting him on my dissertation committee, so he was like one of my advisors. On a gaming dissertation. And I just, from the first time I met him, I loved that he was so genuinely interested in gaming. Like, even, I don't want to date you, Dr. Parsons, but I want to say he's in the 70s. But if he hears this. But he was always like, I don't know, so excited about it. Like, not just like, oh, I'm gonna, play along and humor you, but he really was like, I don't understand it, but I want to understand it. Like, tell me about this world, right? And I love that. So I have to say, first and foremost, I was really fortunate to not encounter too much of that, gaming's not a legitimate academic topic, right? Although I do know that it exists in other places, right? Some conferences and things like that can be kind of weird about it. And I think that's changing a lot. As again, the people who get it, and some of them are older, right? But I think the people who get it see, kind of like what you were saying, that video gaming presents a lot of new opportunities, certainly in terms of careers. I think those people also understand that what we consider gaming has this sort of ripple effect on countless other industries.
Yes,
and
it does.
I think a really good example of this is like virtual reality and augmented reality technologies, which are designed for gaming purposes, but have been expanded into military use, into marketing, into real estate, right? And so, even if you're not, for whatever reason, completely on board with gaming per se, I think it's increasingly difficult to not see the technological value of it, right?
Got it.
Or even the cultural ramifications of it, right? The whole Gamergate thing, right? I think really put gaming culture on a lot of people's radar who had no idea, right? There was like a toxic kind of gaming area, right? And that, out into political conversations, right, and things of that nature. So I think we're starting to see, again, a heightened awareness of why this matters, right, which I think is really good. Now, is there still some resistance from some people? Yeah, but I feel like there are also the people who are like resistant to the internet and Netflix and everything else, right? Like, like the New York Times article, it's just like, gaming is just like the latest thing to kind of be again derided in the same way that comic books and rock and roll and other things were in their respective points in time.
Thank you for saying that. That was fantastic. Okay, so I want to get a little deeper into something that you said there about the toxic nature of gaming. And I grew up playing sports. I spent 20 years as a fast pitch softball umpire. I spent about 17 years in basketball and soccer. And I've been around sports and how it's evolved over time. And the, how do I phrase this? The mental aspect of sports is very important. And trash talking is part of that, right?
Right.
So what is it about gaming that is so different? And I get that I get that people hide behind a keyboard and they say horrible things, but I listen to people like for example, former Baltimore Ravens tight end Shannon Sharp. The man was a legendary trash talker, like legendary, like he would recite an opponent's girlfriend's phone number to them in the game. That's how much of a trash talker Shannon Sharp was. So I guess, where is the line between, I mean, I get that it's a different mentality when you're competing versus when you're just like hanging out with friends and you're just, having a good time and stream. I mean, where is that line? Because for me, I'm from an era where, like, if you let that get in your head, they won, and you are not doing your job right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic question. And it's something that even with gaming, people will defend a lot of the toxic behavior that happens in gaming. You know, they say the same thing. They're like, trash talk is part of it, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I think it comes down to, I love the idea of, like, you know, where do we draw the line between what's like trash talk and what's acceptable versus what becomes harassing or like problematic behavior, right?
Right.
And I feel like, honestly, I think the same rules would apply for me, whether it's traditional sport or gaming. But I think, like, once it strays into sort of personal attacks on an individual, you know, certainly if you're bringing somebody's identity, right? We're talking about, you know, like things like gendered language or racial slurs, right? You know, commentary on disability, right? Like things like that feel really, I think most people would agree, kind of below the belt, you know, kind of behavior. I don't know. I've never been a trash talker myself, so you know, it's it's hard for me to like think about, you know, like my threshold for it is much lower than many people's, I think, even as someone who was an athlete in a former life. But I think to the point where, like, it starts making a game unfun, right?
Okay.
Whether that's a sport or a video game, like, it's like, you know, okay, you want to tease somebody a little bit for you know, sucking or whatever, like that can be kind of funny, but it's hard to say exactly where, because I think that line is different for every person too, right? So, see, you know, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's also different from game to game, because what is too much playing Street Fighter is not the same as what is too much playing StarCraft. It's a different a different culture. If you're playing Call of Duty versus Valorant, those are pretty toxic environments. I mean, I remember very early Call of Duty lobbies where I'm like, wow, everybody hates everybody. I don't want to be here anymore, you know? But that's I mean, it's a fine line. And then you cross that line and you get into situations like there was a female streamer who somebody called her and said that if she doesn't flash the stream with her chest, they're going to kill her dad. And I'm like, whoa, what the heck? How is...
Yeah.
And I'm sure stuff like that gets out to the mainstream press, because it is a very extreme behavior. It's one of those, holy crap, what is going on here moments. And so when you talk to people, and I guess this kind of circles back to non-gamers, when you talk to parents and administrators and teachers, they're like, some of this stuff is pretty nuts, but it's like on the fringe of the fringe. I mean, someone swatting you live on stream doesn't happen every day. It does happen, but it doesn't happen every day. So, I mean, how do you talk to these upper level people who are major decision makers, gatekeepers? They set budgets. How do you talk to them about that stuff? You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's such a good question, and it's funny because it doesn't come up a lot. And again, I think it's a lot of these people, it's a lack of awareness, right? So they don't know necessarily that some of this goes on, right?
Okay.
So I can't say that I've had to deal with that specifically, but it is always, again, as someone who does a lot of research on diversity and inclusivity in games, is always on my mind, right? So, like, you know, if I were approached by parents, you know, I would explain to them that when we're creating these, you know, gaming clubs, right now in my new job at Emmanuel, one of my responsibilities is going to be developing our esports team.
Okay.
And the particular organizations that we're partnering with, you know, to host tournaments and the schools in the area that we want to compete with, you know, I'm very concerned with making sure that we're working with, you know, respectable organizations, right? Ones that really support and affirm diversity and are going to protect my students from toxic behavior, right? Like actually taking a stance on that, right? And so I've been very involved on the ground working with some of those groups to make sure that we're creating a good environment, right? That's not to say that I can prevent all those kinds of things from happening, but at least when we're talking about, you know, hosting a tournament between...
Oh, no. Oh, she just hung up on me.
You know, between 6 Boston schools, we can at least make sure that we're holding our students accountable, right?
Right.
And that other schools are doing the same. So, you know, I think that would put some parents' mind hopefully kind of at ease. You know, and I think too, just having conversations about the understanding that, like, yeah, there is no way to guarantee that.
Well, and see, I think part of this is also managing expectations. I really think it's about managing expectations. Is that parents do not know what to expect. They're like, my kid spends like every non-sleeping moment attached to his Xbox. I'm like, okay, well, he's not out, you know, like breaking the law, but at some point I like want him to have friends that, you know, he can actually stand next to in real life. And so I mean, I get that parents have fear, and it goes back to the fact that old people generally hate change, and sometimes the world moves faster than we can adjust to it. And I get it. But one of the great things about the world moving fast is that there are now colleges that offer scholarships for like playing PUBG or Overwatch or League of Legends. And I know that parents are concerned about two things. One, that their kid gets an education, and two, how do they pay for it, right? So
right, exactly.
So I mean, if my granddaughter can get a college scholarship for playing Overwatch, like, you go, girl, you do that, because that means I don't have to pay as much.
My parents.
Like, so I mean, there's just with anything, there's a dark side, there's a light side, there's a ton of hope out there, and I'm sure in your research you have found shining examples of like, yes, this person might not be here today if it wasn't for, you know, Street Fighter or whatever. So I mean, so in your research, what is, and this is kind of me springing this on you, what do you see as kind of a societal / economic impact of a great gaming culture in a certain space? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So like, what have been like benefits from gaming?
Yes, exactly.
So many. But just like personal things that I've encountered in my studies as I was sitting here thinking about this. A lot of really great stories about people finding community who otherwise maybe wouldn't have. So
Got it.
Actually, in my dissertation, like some stories, and this was a few years ago, and it still sticks with me. But I talked to women who played video games as young as 18 and as old as 70. I think the oldest might have been 70.
Okay.
And some of my favorite stories came from some of these, like, you know, 40 and up individuals,
right?
Talking about what gaming has meant to them throughout their lives, and you know, whether that was, you know, some individuals talked about having, you know, being disabled and unable to leave their homes,
right,
as much as they would like, and gaming for them was like a way to connect and socialize with people that was just easier for them.
Right.
I talked to another woman who was C3, I think, and a department chair of a university, which was like awesome. And she is a diehard World of Warcraft player.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, so great. I was like, would you adopt me? You're like amazing. And she's like, yeah, after this interview, I've actually got a raid. And I was like, I'll make sure you're there. But that was like how she bonded with her teenage son.
Yes.
They would play WoW, and they would play why am I blanking? Halo, religiously together. And I think that's like a beautiful thing, right? It's you know, there you have this like huge generational gap, but you're like, this is, you know, gaming, we think of it as a young person doing together. And it's something that they continue to share, like, to this day. You know, they've, like, he's grown up, I think he's like my age now, right? Like in his 30s. And I just thought that was like really marvelous. And those are like the stories that we don't hear about as much. Like the New York Times doesn't report on that, right? And I think it's a shame. You know, and so to me, there's a lot of really beautiful, like, social and kind of like, you know, and personal mental health kind of stories that come out of these things. that's aside from, again, like the educational benefits and the, you know, physical development things that can all come out of this. Like there's so much there. There's like books and books of, again, you know, the positive things that can come from gaming, just like any medium.
Right.
Again, I think a lot of people aren't necessarily as in tune with.
Well, see, and I love that you brought that up about the generations. My son, pretty much the whole reason I'm here is that my son bought me a Destiny 2 one day. He goes, "Dad, this is free to play. And it's free to play, and I think you should play it." And I'm like, "Okay." And then he said, "And I'll play it with you." I'm like, "I'm there. I am all there." And then,
cool.
Yeah, so we got in this, and then he spent his own money, and he bought me the next DLC. And I'm like, okay, so yeah, and I've said it many times. That's when I knew that my son loved me. Is that, wow, he wants to play video games with his dad. Okay, you got it. And I mean, for his senior project in high school, he wanted to do a senior project on streaming. Well, that was in 2015 when TwitchCon was in San Francisco, and I'm like, okay, for your graduation present, I will take you to TwitchCon. I will take you to TwitchCon. I don't know what we're getting into, but I'll take you, and we win. And now my son and I have this really great bond, and he's finishing up at a Full Sail right now with their game dev course. Yeah, he's doing the game dev course, and he sends me some of his projects, and I share them online, and we're like, "Wow, this is really cool." I'm like, "Yeah, that's my son. That's my son." I'm like, "This is awesome." All right, so you keep on bringing up your dissertation. So I think that's an important subject to talk about, and I don't know that people understand what a dissertation is. There's a difference between a thesis and a, so for some master's degrees you have to do a thesis, and a thesis is you sort of collect current research and you do a kind of summarization. That's like the simplest way to put it without getting too deep into what a thesis should be. However, a dissertation is where you have to do your own research and then draw your own conclusions, right?
Yeah, more or less.
Okay. So sort of talk about your dissertation. What kind of theory you wanted to explore a little bit, because I think that would be really fascinating.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm really interested, kind of a long story, but I had been seeing a lot of data that was talking about the gender gap in people who play video games in the United States.
Right.
You know, the ESA puts out these reports every year, right?
Right.
You know, and it changes a little bit. It's in flux a little bit every year, but a few years ago they reported, you know, almost a 50-50 split. And here they're talking about, you know, binary genders, right? But so there's been this narrative for some time has been that more and more women are starting to play video games, which is great. When I would look closer at the data, what I was seeing was that many women seem to be getting into games when they were significantly older. So like teenagers or in their 20s. And this is consistent with research since the 90s that young girls don't seem to play games as much as young boys of their same age.
Okay.
So I was like, well, this is interesting, right? So the story here seems to be, you know, like boys are playing video games kind of their whole lives. And for whatever reason, like women tended to be kind of coming into gaming a little later in their life. Okay. So that became sort of the focal point. And I wanted to know kind of like, all right, well, what's going on there, right? And I was like, obviously there's some questions of access, you know, and like socialization from their parents, right? Like, so essentially what I set out to do, I did 2 different methodologies for this. So the first thing I did is I put together a survey to just kind of get like a broad picture of you know, how old were you when you started playing? You know, what kind of genres were you interested in? You know, how often do you play? Right, a bunch of different questions.
Right.
And over 5,000 people took it.
Wow. Okay.
Which, if you know anything about like social science research, that's an insane number.
It is absolutely large number. Yes. So just hold right there. So for people that don't understand, sample size is vital to your theory. If your sample size is small, people are like, hey, you're not really capturing the full picture. So sample size is important. 5,000 is a large number. So go ahead.
Yeah. It kind of freaked me out, to be honest, because I was like, oh, that's a lot of data to go through.
Yep.
I ended up, my final sample ended up being closer to 3,000. I went through and excluded people who like didn't finish the whole survey, like things like that, right?
Okay.
Kind of preserve the integrity. But anyway, so around 3,000, women's data kind of at the end of the day. And then from there, I think it was 25 interviews I did, kind of follow-up interviews with women from, kind of went through and picked like from different age groups and different kind of demographic makeups to just kind of do a deeper dive, right? And like dig deeper into some of the responses from the survey. So sort of the gist of it was kind of the theory that I used to analyze all of this was actually from the field of leisure studies.
Okay.
Which I didn't know was a thing when I first started grad school. But it is the academic study of people's use of their free time. Okay. Right. And like recreational spaces and parks and things like that. Right. And basically the narrative that I kind of constructed with my dissertation was looking at how women experience gaming in fundamentally different ways due to how our leisure time is structured and kind of negotiated. Okay. So, there's data on this. This has been kind of the story since like the 50s, but in general, women tend to have less leisure time than men because of things like, housework, right? And still a lot of like domestic responsibilities, even though it's getting better. Or women will feel less entitled to leisure time. So even if they have free time, they'll report expressing more amounts of guilt about like, oh, I should be doing X, Y, and Z, things like that, right? Childcare responsibilities, right? All these sorts of things. And so what I was sort of doing was putting together, all that we know about leisure and women's relationship with free time and putting that together with kind of what we know about women's experience with gaming, right? And then like the data that I was collecting. So for like young girls, right, it was, not so much about leisure time, but about parents and the socialization process, right? So as one would expect, a lot of people's parents thought that gaming was inappropriate for young girls, right? So many of my participants didn't grow up with games, or if they did, it was their brother's console, and they would grow up watching their brother play and maybe play a little bit themselves, but definitely didn't get like into gaming until they were older.
Right.
So that was kind of interesting, right? Like I was finding that young girls definitely had less access, which again was kind of confirming what research had said for some time. But then, I was interested in then, okay, so what was like the hook, right? Then how did you like get into games as you got older? And sometimes it was like, a person they were dating. It was, oh, I remembered, when I was a kid that it was really cool. And then I wanted to kind of, now that I'm on my own, without parents or whatever, like kind of get into it more myself, right? There was like a lot of different stuff kind of going on there. So it was just a really big project trying to sort of understand how that relationship differs based on one's gender identity and access to games throughout different stages of their life.
Wow, and so for people that don't understand how research goes, this is not something you do in like 3 days. This is like a long time of gathering data and making sure that data is good data. So like you said, Dr. Steph, you had an initial sample size of 5,000. You went through like, I can't use some of this because either they didn't finish or it's unclear on this answer, so I can't use that piece of data. So you're trying to get good data, and we can talk about what is good data and what is not good data all day. But you went from 5,000 to 3,000, and then you had to parse through it. Then you had 25 interviews off of the 3,000. So basically, 1% of the 3,000 3,000 people who you accepted for their survey, you then did in-person interviews or like phone interviews with them. So in your process of going through the data, were there major differences in terms of demographics between girls, maybe girls who are black versus Hispanic, people who grew up in America versus people who maybe grew up in a different country and came into America, so they might have a different, you know, mentality coming in. I mean, for me the fascination is in the details. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There were like so many details in this project because it was so big.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so I did end up getting respondents from like all over the world, which again was like unexpected. I really thought I was gonna get like 300 people responding to this, and we were like, my committee was like, that's awesome, aim for that, that's great. Yep. So when 5,000 people had responded in less than a week, I was freaking out.
Wow.
To be honest. But anyway, I wouldn't say that I didn't, at least in my survey results, find a whole lot about racial differences.
Okay.
The biggest area where that would happen was access in youth, which makes sense because that was tied to things like income, right? Which is often correlated with one's ethnicity and racial identity.
Yep.
So there was a little bit of that, but it wasn't something that people talked about a whole lot, right? So I could like read into that more than it was there. One of the challenges with this project was kind of reconciling cultural differences, right? So like thinking about what the gaming landscapes were like in different countries. So for example, like I had at least one participant, a couple from Japan, who's again somehow found this survey. And I had to say like, okay, well think about like what, you know, gaming and access to gaming is like in Japan versus the United States, right? And the US and Canada was like where the majority of my participants came from.
Okay.
So, you know, you just had to like kind of keep that as a filter when going through and thinking about the stories they were telling. Again, nothing like hugely dramatic. To me, like gender stuck out as sort of the big defining difference for a lot of people, so regardless of where they were. But, you know, that's not to say that, again, like race, again, income, education, and things like that didn't also play a role, because they certainly do.
Okay, so I'm really interested in hearing if you've sort of tracked this over time, or if you have some sort of thought process. What happens with women and girls when they start at a certain age? Is there like an arc where if they spend a certain amount of time in it, they hit a critical mass and they stick with it and it becomes who they are? Or is there a point at which with certain factors, income, access, you know, family situation, things like that, where they hit a point like, you know, I really don't have time for this anymore, or no, this isn't a part of my life anymore. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will say in the survey, I believe everybody who took it still played games to some degree. So there was nobody who's like, I don't play at all anymore, right? But there definitely would be for a lot of individuals kind of a drop off, right? So first to start with kind of the younger people, to answer sort of your first part of the question. I definitely found that girls who were exposed to gaming at a really young age, and some of my favorite stories were like girls sitting on their dad's lap playing video games, playing Diablo with him. It was I loved them. Oh, there's a whole section in the dissertation just about like dads and Diablo. There's like a few great quotes about it.
That's awesome.
I loved it. It was so awesome. And for them, it was like a core part of their identity, right? Because like some of their earliest memories, I think it mattered too that it was something they shared with somebody. So I think there's like, you know, you had like a father-daughter bond kind of thing, right? And that's like a big part of their relationship, and they would like still talk about gaming. So I would find that for individuals like that, it was something that was pretty much a constant through their whole life. Now that said, all the women I talked to would say, you know, like, so I asked them, you know, in a typical week, like how much of your leisure time is spent playing video games as opposed to like doing other things, right? And for many of them, this was interesting. Of the leisure time they had, gaming would often be like most heavily the thing that they did. But many of them reported not having a whole lot of leisure time. So the consensus was like, I really, really love games and I wish I could play more of them, but due to these different constraining factors, right, that impede on my leisure time in general, I don't get to play as much as I used to, right? And those things tended to be having kids, right? Like children were sometimes a part of that, which makes sense. Some parents I talked to kind of doubled up, which was interesting too. So they would play with their kids.
Well done, mom and dad. Well done. Well done.
Yeah, right. But even then, it was like, well, I'm not necessarily playing the things I want to play, right? I'm like, playing the Wii with them and stuff like that. But it's all good. School, right? I talked to a lot of students who were, again, income reasons were like a big part of it. They're like, I'm broke, so I haven't had a console in like 4 years, right? So, I don't play as much as I used to, or I'm busy with school. Work for everybody was sort of a thing. A lot of the older individuals, if they were taking care of like elderly family members, there were a couple people who were like taking care of like, parents in hospice and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So just like life stuff, right? That, would kind of get in people's way. And again, it wasn't that, I really didn't find too many people who were like, I never find time for games, but it's just like, it became a lot harder. For a lot of people, but it was, again, it depended on people's context, which I think was important.
Wow, these are the conversations I love having, where you're talking about the societal impacts. I mean, I've always said gaming gives people hope. It gives people a place to belong. I mean, it going back to something you said earlier about people who are older finding a way to connect with the younger generation of, playing World of Warcraft. The fact that you have a grandmother playing with her grandson, playing World of Warcraft, is like, hey, I can't be on this interview long. I have a raid later. You're like, oh,
it was so awesome.
Well done, Grandma. You're the queen. Well done. Well done. I very much remember a story. I had a friend who was in charge of an elderly care facility, and they purchased. This was several years ago. They purchased Wii's for the people to play, and nobody knew it at the time, but apparently one of the older gentlemen was a Golden Gloves boxing champion, and they didn't know, and so one of the things you can do on the Wii is box, and he just like changed his whole outlook on life. He got to relive some of the things, and I'm like, that's what's important right there.
So cool. I love that.
Yeah, I'm sure this guy's sitting there like, oh man, I hate life. I just want to go away. I'm done with this. And then he gets to relive a little bit and think about when he was younger and share stories. Because old people love sharing stories. Let's just say that out loud. But, Dr. Steph, thank you very much for making time for me today. This was a fantastic conversation. I hope that at some point in the future, whatever your next research project is, whatever your next paper is, I would really love to hear about it. I love these conversations. These are great. What I'll do is I'll stick links in the description below, but if people want to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
Yeah. Twitter is a pretty good way for me. And my Twitter handle is just @Stephanie Orme. It's STEPHANIE ORME. I'm on LinkedIn. That's always a hard one to like give out, but we can post it.
Right.
Those are probably the easiest ways, I'd say.
Perfect. Oh, I love these conversations. Wish I could have them forever. Dr. Steph, thank you very much for making time for me. Everybody, thank you for tuning in today. Great conversation. Sticking around for the end of the podcast. Please like, share, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hope to have more of these coming up real soon, and I'll see you real soon.
Thank you for tuning in today. You can find links to everyone on the show in the description below. Check out BillTheConquerer on Twitch and Twitter to stay up to date on his thoughts and ideas about gaming culture.